The Israelite population in Egypt had grown massive, and the ruling Pharaoh saw them as a threat. His solution was brutal: widespread enslavement and a sweeping decree to drown every newborn Hebrew boy in the Nile River. God's providence worked quietly behind enemy lines. One Hebrew mother hid her infant in a woven basket and floated him down that very river. Through a stunning twist, the child was discovered and adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, placing the future deliverer inside the dictator's household. The pharaohs of Egypt's 18th dynasty claimed absolute authority over the world. To them, a rapidly expanding Semitic population living within their borders looked like a ticking time bomb, a rival nation gestating inside their own, threatening to displace the native people. Moses grew up carrying a fractured identity. He was raised with the education and prestige of Egyptian royalty, but remained aware of his Hebrew blood. He lived as a man caught between two warring worlds. At 40 years old, Moses decided to take justice into his own hands. Watching an Egyptian taskmaster beat a Hebrew slave, Moses struck out in violent defense, killing the Egyptian and burying his body in the sand. The backlash was immediate. The very people he tried to save rejected his authority, mocking his attempt to be their judge. Word of the murder reached the palace, and Pharaoh instantly issued a death warrant for his adopted grandson. Moses fled. He was stripped of his royal status, his titles, and his wealth. He left the lush Nile Valley behind and escaped into the remote wilderness of Midian. He settled there, marrying the daughter of a priest named Jethro. The former prince of Egypt spent the next several decades tending sheep in the desert. For 40 years, Moses lived as a simple laborer, gaining an experience the royal palace never provided. By the end of his exile, the Egyptian prince had vanished, replaced by a shepherd prepared for a long journey through this same wilderness. 40 years passed. The arrogant prince was gone, replaced by a scruffy, forgotten 80-year-old shepherd who believed his story was over. Then came a divine interruption. Moses encountered a bush radiating intense light and heat in the rocky desert, yet miraculously the leaves and branches did not turn to ash. God spoke from the fire, commanding Moses to return to Egypt and bring the Israelites out. Moses was terrified. He begged God to send someone else, aware that he was a fugitive who had already failed at this mission. God did not equip him with an army. Instead, he took Moses' ordinary shepherd's staff, turned it into a living snake, and then back into a staff again. God replaced Moses' earthly tactics with divine authority. That wooden stick was the proof that God's power, not human violence or royal leverage, would break the chains of Egypt. Moses walked back into the center of the world's superpower. He was an aging shepherd standing inside the overwhelming grandeur of Pharaoh's golden throne room. His demand on behalf of God was simple: "Let my people go." Pharaoh mocked him. He refused to recognize Israel's God, and he would not surrender his massive labor force. This chart tracks God's response. These plagues systematically dismantled Egypt's specific gods. Turning the Nile to blood humiliated Hapi. As strikes escalated, frogs and flies terrorized the populace. The breaking point, right before Passover, was a suffocating darkness, an attack on Ra, the sun god. The weight of this cosmic battle finally shattered Pharaoh's resolve. He released the Israelites, proving that the most entrenched human empire was powerless against the Creator. Pharaoh's pride flared one last time. He sent his elite chariot army to hunt the fleeing slaves down. The Israelites panicked, pinned helplessly between the Egyptian military and the deep waters of the Red Sea. Decades earlier, Moses would have drawn a sword. Now, acting as a prophet who relied entirely on God, he simply stood at the water's edge and raised his shepherd's staff in obedience. The sea split wide open. Two massive walls of water pulled back, exposing a dry path through the seabed for the Israelites to cross. Moses' name is rooted in an Egyptian word meaning sun, but it carries a Hebrew wordplay. Decades after an Egyptian princess drew him from the Nile, he drew his entire nation out of the water to safety. Once Israel crossed, the walls of water crashed down on the pursuing army. The physical deliverance was final. The chapter on their enslavement was permanently closed. escaping Egypt was only half the mission. Physical freedom without spiritual direction was just wandering in a dangerous wilderness. The people needed an identity. They arrived at the base of Mount Sinai, its peak veiled in storm clouds and fire. Here, God stepped in to forge a formal covenant with the newly freed people. He delivered the 10 Commandments. This law provided the moral and societal structure needed to transform a group of traumatized slaves into a unified nation. The Exodus began with an exiled murderer and ended with a sovereign nation bound by a covenant. Moses returned to the mountain not as a prince claiming power, but as a shepherd leading a people into their new identity.